This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome to Japan on Film Podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and welcoming a new guest to the show today, and that is Trevor. Trevor, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Very excited to be here.
Glad to have you. So before we get started talking about
kind of table setting for the movie, and then what our expectations are, and then on the drive back, like you're getting like our first impressions of the movie we saw, and we're kind of processing it in real time. So we like to say it's sort of replicating the experience of going to movies with friends, and kind of lingering in the theater a little bit after you saw it, just kind of processing and talking about the movie you saw. So it's kind of in spirit of that, and it's largely new releases, but we do occasionally go and see some old classics as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really cool concept for a podcast. I'm not sure if I've ever heard anyone doing something like that before. And that is something, now that you mentioned it, I realize that's something I kind of miss because it's something I don't really have very often these days. Typically, when I go to movies now, it's usually by myself because it's tough to find time with I know you got two kids as well. You have kids as well. I've got two of my own, and it's tough to find time to go to the movies. And usually my wife will give me permission to like go when I've got like a day off or something, and I'll usually go to like the first show in the morning, so she's not too overwhelmed with dealing with them by the time I get back.
Yeah, no, we sort of landed on the concept out of necessity because we were talking about wanting to do a movie podcast, and then trying to figure out how we'd find time for our wives to let us both go see a movie, drive there and back, and then find time to record. And then we were saying how on the way back we couldn't really talk about anything because we wanted it all to be fresh, but then we're like, we have these great conversations on the drive back anyway, so why not just record that? And then I feel like there's plenty of people who are in that same sort of boat.
What is your history with Japanese movies?
I want to see the 100 classic movies that everyone's supposed to see, and then I saw a lot of Kurosawa movies there, and Ozu, and all the real classics. And then just as I've sort of kind of have kept going and with interest, like I have a general interest in world cinema, and Japanese is kind of, I'd say, at the top of my interest, though not my only interest. Like, I also quite like Korean movies and French movies, German movies, but I'd say between France and Japan are kind of my two favorites for world cinema. But I've really stuck with it ever since, sort of just discovering it as like a 19, 20-year-old.
Yeah, I think I had a similar experience. For me, I was also university time, and got really interested in Japanese cinema as well. A little bit of Korean and Hong Kong. I never really got into like European cinema as much as most people in like film school and that kind of thing do. But Japanese film, Korean film, and Hong Kong films, I thought those are probably like the big three as far as international films that really kind of grabbed my interest.
Yeah, and my wife and we did live in Korea for a year, and I think that's when I kind of like really started clicking in with Asian cinema. Like I'd say more Korean then, but I was already sort of into Japanese films already. But then that was 10 years ago or so now. So I've really been into Asian cinema for quite a while.
So you said you got into this in university. So were you studying film in university, or did you just or were you like me and just wanted to take film classes?
Well, I actually didn't take a single film class. I think most people who know me assume that I did because that's my main interest. But I was a history student. I'm really just a fan. Really like seeing everything. I get annoyed when there's something I haven't seen that's like part of the
Mhm.
cultural conversation. So I'm really just just a general fan and wanting to explore things that interest me, and film's just one of those things.
Oh, that's cool. I misunderstood when you said you wanted to be a good university student. I just assumed you were talking
No,
about taking film classes.
no, more just like the guy at the party who's seen the
Mhm.
movies that people are talking about, that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah. I was definitely one of those types too myself. I
Yeah.
did take some film classes because I was a literature major, but most of and there were some really interesting film classes, but there wasn't like a dedicated film major at my university. So it was just kind
Right.
of like, oh, here's a world cinema course, here's a horror cinema course, and these will count towards your elective classes. I'm like, okay, I'm taking those classes then instead.
I honestly feel really stupid because the thought never even occurred to me to take a film class while I was at school. Like I really should have, because like you said, like, you have these electives anyways. So why wouldn't you
Mhm.
take something that was of interest to you? But yeah, I just never did.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I had, and you know what? It was funny. I was doing the conversation with some of my students about comparing American universities to Japanese universities, and I was showing them like my old university's recent catalog, and I'm looking through it. I'm like, God damn it! They've got all these courses now that I wish I could have taken
Oh
back then.
yeah. No, yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
yeah, it's like they have like graphic novel courses. They've got like all these different types of film courses. I'm like, where was all this stuff back when I was in university and I was just forced to take like British and American lit, and that was it.
Yeah, I know for sure. That the guy that I do the podcast with, Pete, he just went back and took one course at the university that's close to us, and it was just on video games. And it's like
That's
not even
awesome.
not,
Yeah.
not even on like for non-developing, just sort of like a history of video games class. So I wish something like that was around, but maybe it
Mhm.
was around. Like I said, I didn't really do a good job of exploring the syllabus.
You got into Japanese movies when you were in university, like we've been saying. But what were the movies that kind of really piqued your interest?
So I guess uh I guess sort of kind of where we're along today. Like I love like the samurai movies, the Edo
Mhm.
movies. There's some Kurosawa ones that I saw very early on that really shaped me. Like um, To Live. I think
Oh
Ikiru is
yeah,
the
yeah,
Japanese one.
Ikiru,
Like
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I I almost recommended that one for us to watch, but I'm like I don't know if you need two men crying on a podcast the whole time.
That one is, it's funny. Last season, which but we're recording way in advance, so that episode hasn't come out on the feed yet, but by the time people listen to this, it will be out. We talked about Redbeard, which is also, a lot of similar themes that Kurosawa was exploring in that one, and Ikiru. And my guess at that time, I think he preferred Redbeard, if I'm recalling correctly. But me, I still maybe Wikipedia.
Against the Winds of Death. Okay, yeah, well that's
Yeah.
interesting. I think the English title's a little.
still sounds a little bit odd, but that pops up in a lot of these titles. I would probably
I think there's
something
like
else.
four of the 6 titles or something have baby cart in them.
Yes,
so they're really
yeah.
leaning on that premise there.
Yeah, and so obviously based on the manga by Kazuo Koike, and he also wrote the screenplay.
He wrote the screenplay,
as well.
Yes, I think he did. I think he did for most of them. He was like a big driver behind the whole series.
The character throughout all 6 of these movies. And when this one was first released in the US, it was there was a composite film called Shogun Assassin. So if you've ever seen Kill Bill and you remember the scene when the daughter wants to watch Shogun Assassin, that's what they're talking about basically on Wolf and Cub.
He says Shogun Assassin is too long.
Yeah.
So I believe Shogun Assassin is the first 2 films, and then Shogun Assassin 2 is this one.
Yeah. Yes. Shogun Assassin 2, Lightning Swords of Death.
Yeah. And so I haven't seen the Shogun Assassin cut. It's actually playing at my local art house sometime in the summer, so I plan to see it at that point. And I hope to like it much better because my first time through these movies, I didn't like the first 2 all that much. Like I didn't like the first one hardly at all. It took me a bit of a while to kind of get into it, or maybe the quality just got better as the movies went along.
So these movies, I mean, they came out in really quick order. Like, these first 4 movies, Sword of Vengeance, Baby Cart at the River Styx, Baby Cart to Hades, Baby Cart in Peril, all of these came out in 1972. And then the 5th one, Baby Cart in the Land of Demons, followed in 1973.
Yeah.
And then the final one, White Heaven and Hell, came out in 74.
Yeah, and I believe by the time that the 6th movie had come out, the TV show had already started up, which was I don't know if you've gotten to the history of why they suddenly stopped making these, because they were quite popular, but the star, and his name is escaping me now, he objected to the idea that there would be a TV show going on at the same time as the movie series, and then he basically just said that he would be quitting if they would be going on with the TV show.
Oh, I think I had heard something about that before. We had talked a little bit about him when we did an episode on Zatoichi a while back, and I think we had gotten a little bit of a conversation about that. But yeah, and there have been a few different TV shows, as I recall. There have also been a few different movies too. Like after these ones, there was also Final Conflict, and there have been several TV movies as well.
Yeah, none of which that I've actually seen.
No, same here. Like I haven't even seen all of the original series. Like so far, it's just been the first one and now the 3rd one that I've seen. So yeah, I've read some of the manga though. I've read like at least the first volume of the manga, I think.
Yeah. So, well, to give a brief history of my background for this, like I was just listening to a podcast one day, like I think probably like about 2017 or 2018, and someone was like, they were just chatting about what they've been doing or watching lately, and this one host was talking about how he just completed this big project, Lone Wolf and Cub, where he read the entire manga series. I don't remember how many issues it is, but I read like the 12.
It's like 20 some volumes, I think, in that Dark Horse put out.
Yeah, and I read like the omnibus version of it, where they kind of compact in these like huge things, and then he's like, so you have the huge manga series, then you have 6 films, so it was a big project I worked on for like about 6 months, and then I'm the type of guy who likes to take on big projects like that. So then I read the whole manga series, and then my wife for Christmas one year bought me the Criterion box set for Lone Wolf and Cub, and then as I started going through, so I put the first movie on, and then I think like, oh my gosh, who is this playing Ito? I don't agree with this casting choice at all. And then you touched on that a little bit when you were talking about Sword of Vengeance in your episode, about how he's really, really not the type that you would think to be playing a character like this.
Yeah, that was definitely my impression of him when I first saw the movie. And it's funny because although apparently he was like a legit martial artist, and
Yeah, and you can
again when we
tell.
did that episode, yeah, when we did that episode on Zatoichi, my guest host on that, Frank, who is also a martial artist, he talked about Wakayama's martial arts expertise. Um, and he was also a theater performer as well. And he's not a bad actor or anything. He's not, I don't think he's a bad choice for this character. I think he does a pretty good job of embodying the character, but just, the image of the character, it definitely does not fit my image of what this character should look like.
Yeah, well, because like Ito is really drawn like the like Yojimbo kind of samurai hero, right? And so
Mhm.
I think the first movie just also is not really as good as the rest of the movies, aside from the sixth one, which is probably the weakest in the series.
Mhm.
Um, and as I was going through, it took me a while to click. So like the first movie, I didn't really enjoy it all, and then I thought maybe it's going to be a slog. I'm enjoying it a lot more in the second movie, and then when I get to Baby Cart and Hades, I think this is incredible. Even though he's not the wouldn't be someone I would cast for the role. By the time you get to the third movie, like he is really making the character his own, and I think
Mhm.
you kind of forget that he's not kind of what the character should really be looking like. And to your point, he does really embody the character quite well, um, while still being like its own thing. Like I think of Lone Wolf and Cub, the movie series, different than the manga.
Yeah, so also I think a big part of that too might be that the director. So we had Kenji Misumi, and he did direct a bunch of Zatoichi films as well, but I guess maybe he didn't quite find his footing with this series until the third one. As maybe that's what the reason was. Um
Yeah, well, and they made them in such quick succession, right? So like there are some really good flashes of genius in the first two, but by the time you get to the third one, I feel like it's a well-oiled, well-running machine.
mhm. Yeah, definitely. And I'm just looking through it because I know he didn't direct all of them. He directed
I
four
think
of
the
them in
first four,
total.
yeah.
The first four, okay. So yeah, he directed the second one, third one, obviously, and yeah. So the fourth one actually, it looks like that was directed by Buichi Saito,
Okay,
and
does he come back for
then
the fifth one then? Is that what
he
it
comes
is?
back. Yes, he comes
Okay.
back for the fifth one. I think that was the last one he directed,
Okay.
and and then the final one was directed by Yoshiyuki Kuroda. So yeah, he directed the first three, and then he came back for five.
Right. Yeah. And if you ever do get around to watching them all, like three, four, five are really incredible. Three, I think, is
Mhm.
is the best, but it's really high quality for those middle chapters. And then uh six gets pretty silly. Like
Mhm.
it's like kind of just like the entire thing's kind of just based around that red blood looks really cool on snow, which is good. And they're using the baby cart as like a sled for a lot of it. But not a bad movie. Like some people will say it's like straight up bad, but it's definitely a dip in quality. So almost good that they just left it at six.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe they were influenced by Lady Snowblood by that point.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, because the manga would have been out, right? And it's
My, oh, the no, no, the movie came out in '73.
oh, did it really? Okay, so
Yeah, yeah. So yeah,
okay,
maybe
well
they
then,
got and Lady Snowblood ended up being really popular as well. So maybe
yeah.
that's why it was
Oh,
just
maybe that.
influenced.
Okay, I didn't realize that it was all happening at the same time. So it's a big moment for Koki, or sorry if I'm
Koike,
pronouncing your
yeah, yeah.
Koike. Yeah, so that because that's his like second biggest property, right? All kind of happening
Yes, yeah.
at once.
Yeah, although and this is kind of a, drifting off topic a little bit, but I have read I think it was the first book of Lady Snowblood, and just based on that first book, I think I actually prefer the movie better.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah, I'll
Yeah.
I have seen the movie. It's been a while, but it does have some incredible images for it.
Yeah, I think there's something about that movie that it elevates it beyond what you'd expect from most of these, like, fairly low budget samurai films. I will say too, like I'd watched the Criterion Collection as well. I believe it was the Criterion Collection. I've got it on um uh uh my Plex, so I don't remember exactly if that's, but whatever it was, the version I have is
time fan, though I have gone through them about 2 or 3 times, depending on which movie it is.
Mhm. So what are some things that well, I mean, obviously you said that it really kind of blew you away. This is what really kind of, started to get you into the series after what's kind of slogging through the first two movies. But going back and rewatching it now with a more critical eye, what were some things that kind of jumped out at you?
I think, honor and what does it actually mean to be honorable in this kind of system, and is it possible to be a good person and to be honorable, and who does this system of honor actually serve? Does it actually, is it just serving the lords who don't actually take it too seriously, and these sort of middlemen in between who are trying to embody the samurai code, do they kind of get steamrolled over? And then what happens to the common people in systems like this?
Yeah. Yeah, those are some things that really kind of stood out to me as well, because there is this, and this is something that kind of drives me nuts about a lot of samurai movies. Like The Last Samurai is a perfect example of this. It's like over romanticism of the idea of samurai being all honorable and all that. And and that it's funny because when I showed in my film class, when I showed Last Samurai to my Japanese students, they loved that movie. They're like, "Oh, this is such a great film." And when I showed them something like Lady Snowblood or Yojimbo, they're like, "Ah, I don't really like that as much." And I'm like, "Well, actually, these are closer to what the
Yeah.
actual the samurai actually were. There is like they weren't all these, perfect superheroes who are always out to fight for the common man. More often than not, they were fighting for, they're just fighting to preserve the power structures."
Yeah, like this really comes to light in the you know the very upsetting like sexual assault scene in the countryside, where these three mercenaries for hire assault these two women, and then the very seasoned former samurai, like turned Ronin, is basically, he feels he's in a position that he has to protect his lord's honor, even if it means protecting these men. So he kills the women because he thinks that that's the right thing to do as someone who wants to be a samurai. And like it's and you could tell, like, there's a conflict within him because he doesn't like doing these actions, but he feels that he's compelled to do them if he wants to be a true samurai, which is a question he's searching for throughout the whole movie. I wrote down the character's name. I can't. Is
Kanbei.
Kanbei, yeah. So he's kind of embodying this conflict that we're talking about, like wanting to kind of live up to the ideal of the samurai, like that, probably just exist in myths, but then he ends up being just a tool of the people in power. And then he sometimes, like, his own views on what it means to be a warrior and what it takes to win a fight are in conflict with those codes.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that rape scene, it almost made me check out of the movie altogether right from the start, because it is the rape scenes in this movie, there's that one, and there's the one
The one in the
later
brothel,
with
yeah.
yeah, and both of them are just gratuitous, right? I mean, I think that's and I mean, I can't necessarily fault this movie so much because that was kind of a trend in these movies back then. Like even Lady Snowblood, they had the rape of her mother right at the beginning like
Yeah.
that in and it's been years since I saw Sword of Vengeance, but I'm pretty sure I recall a pretty gratuitous rape scene in that as well.
Yeah, no, and it's been a while since I saw Sort of Vengeance, like it, but this one, like it is very upsetting. Like it's hard to say that you know, they're not gratuitous, but I think that they aren't like salacious. Like I think they're they're wanting to depict it as a terrible thing. Like I don't think they're trying to titillate the audience. Um, and although it's uncomfortable to watch, I think it conveys the point that being a common person in Japan at this time, and especially a woman in the Edo era was, it's you are at the mercy of people, and especially Lone Wolf and Cub series is basically a road series. Like it mostly takes place in between big civilized cities,
Right.
and you're really at the mercy of these terrible men with swords, right? And what can you actually do to stop these people from just doing whatever they want?
Well, I mean, it's basically a Western movie, right? The
Yeah.
the whole series, like it's and I think that's one of the reasons why the concept here translated so well to The Mandalorian, because The Mandalorian is basically a space Western. So,
Yeah.
And also why it works so well in like what was that? The Last of Us too, because again, very similar themes.
Yeah.
Like you're out in the frontier. It's this very dangerous land you're trying to wander through. So yeah, very and yeah, I get how they're trying to show just how dangerous it is, but I do feel that there's a better way to get that message across without kind of lingering on these rape scenes as
Yeah,
much as
no,
they do.
I'm not defending it at all. I'm
Yeah,
just saying
yeah.
I think it's done better here than elsewhere. Like even in some westerns, there's some pretty
Mhm.
terrible stuff. But yeah, like if I were to make an adaptation of this, I would not I would not be as gratuitous as they show it here for sure.
Yeah. And it did
Well,
get to a point where I'm just kind of like looking at my watch. I'm like, how long is this scene going to go on? And,
no, yeah, for sure. Well, you kind of touched on one point there. I was going to ask you, like, because Lone Wolf and Cub wasn't the first kind of series to have like a a seasoned warrior paired with a child, but it's sort of become like the easiest one to kind of trope. And I was just
Mhm.
going to ask, what do you think is so kind of universal about that concept that they keep kind of going to that same well, and it's effective when it's used?
I mean, honestly, I think a big part of it is just the fact that it's that stark contrast, right? I mean, I think one of the things that works so well about and it's hard to see as much in these movies because even though Wakayama's a pretty good actor, he's not a great actor. So I feel like the affection for Daigoro, it doesn't quite get across to the level it really needs to, like especially compared to some of the later versions of this time when you've got Pedro Pascal doing it, where you can see
Mhm.
you can see very clearly those two sides of his character, the hardened warrior, but also this like the soft caring father. And I think that is in some aspect, I mean, I think part of it might be a little bit of wish fulfillment on the audience part, because most of I think a lot of people who are into
Right.
these types of movies and these types of books are guys like our age or older, people who are fathers, and it is kind of like that wish fulfillment. You want to think like, oh, I want to be a good father, but I could still be a badass if I had to.
No, yeah, for sure. Well, and wish fulfillment, I think, like if you're a kid watching this, right? Like maybe you couldn't see
Mhm.
yourself as Ito, but maybe you could be Daigoro, right? So maybe you could just be along for the adventure.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons why we kept getting so many like kid sidekicks in movies. Like
Yeah,
everyone, like who wouldn't want to be short round and teaming up with Indiana Jones?
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Although, or same thing with like going back to the comics of the 1940s. Like, who wouldn't want to be? Robin was like a wish fulfillment for the
Yeah,
kids
I
who were
think
reading at the time.
I think Robin's a great call because and I can't remember who said this, but Robin's kind of the key character because like Batman is just so skilled that he's like you can't really like see yourself as him basically because he's too
Mhm.
competent, but you can see yourself in the role as Robin.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
It always
and
drives me nuts when people would say this is again getting off topic. It always drives me nuts when people would say that they can relate to Batman more than like Superman or anything like that. I'm like, he's a billionaire with post traumatic stress. I don't think you can relate to that as well as you think.
yeah, no, yeah, for sure. And yeah,
Um,
you mentioned the thing about the the Mandalorian and like it shows the affection really well. And I think Lone Wolf and Cub is a very interesting inspiration for that because the relationship between the father and son in Lone Wolf and Cub is very weird because
it is, yeah.
basically like they start off on their adventure when their their house is destroyed and the mother's murdered, and they start off as basically like ghosts. Like they say that we're demons walking the path to hell.
Hmm.
um and there's moments in the manga in particular where people are threatening Daigoro and they're saying like give up or we're going to kill your son, and the only way he gets out of the situation is by not caring that
Hmm.
the people are threatening his son, right? So it is kind of it's a weird relationship to portray on film in that regard because I feel like he should he should really be more affectionate and stuff than he is, and that doesn't really come across in the movies.
I mean, yeah, and also to that point as well. I mean, I honestly think that in this movie in particular, it was definitely a little bit more stark, but you could probably edit Daigoro out of this movie and you
Yeah,
would not really lose any of the story points because he doesn't really have, even though it is called Lone Wolf and Cub, the cub part of it is kind of a footnote in it.
yeah, and in the movies like he's not really like on his back as much as he is in
Mhm.
the manga series. Like he's really like he's climbing up walls, and Daigoro's right back there, and that's one of the key reasons why they wrote the characters the way that they did. Like because you're basically like you're writing someone who is like an invincible swordsman, but you're
Mhm.
giving him an Achilles heel, right? That he's wearing on his back the entire time.
Right.
But I think when you're translating that to a live action format, it's really hard to do that like without putting a child in actual danger. Like was
Right.
what
Yeah.
we'll talk about the final sequence, but like it would be like you know irresponsible of them to to put Daigoro into the action for there, but you're right. Like he's mostly he's in the cart unseen, or he's just kind of left at a temple where when Ito goes off.
Yeah, this is like the most stoic kid in history. I mean, like
Yeah,
nothing phases him. He sees he sees people getting raped, he sees people getting, chopped up, he sees his father getting tortured and beaten with sticks, and he just like has the same expression on his face the entire time.
yeah.
I mean, I
No,
think
and sorry, go
if
ahead.
you're going to have, sorry, I was just gonna, if I'm just almost finished with this, but if you're going to have this kid in there, I mean, at least show him react to stuff the way a kid would.
Yeah, well, I think they're trying to be true to the manga, and where he like this is sort of normal for him, right?
Mhm.
Because he's not living a normal childhood. He's seeing you know murder and carnage almost every single day. And
Right.
I think it's the next movie it gets into where an enemy samurai kind of comes across Daigoro on his own. Because in the manga series, he was often kind of left by himself to fend for himself for like weeks or months at a time, not knowing if his father is ever going to come back alive. And a samurai comes across him and then just notices that this kid is off. Like he doesn't seem like a kid; he seems like a demon, basically.
Hmm.
And then he follows him around and like notices that he doesn't interact with the world the way that a child is supposed to, and he's caught in a big fire, and then he instinctively knows to bury himself in mud so
Yeah.
that he won't die. So I guess that's sort of what the film series is going for, is trying to just like the direction they're probably giving the kid is like, give me absolutely nothing. And yeah, probably works better in a manga than it does in a movie, because you are trying to sympathize with the kid, right? And it's a little different.
Yeah. Well, also too, like I think you see in some of these other adaptations, like we mentioned, The Mandalorian, and The Last of Us, and in there the The Last of Us, obviously, right? Because she's not like a little girl. She's like, a teenager. So obviously she's going to have more to say. But even in the case of like Grogu in The Mandalorian, even though he doesn't talk, he does have more agency and more interaction in that series than Daigoro does in this.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, it's a weird dynamic. Like as much as they tried to, as much as they've inspired other works, like they haven't really replicated this same sort of relationship, because it's too weird. Like it's too unique. Like, and like you said, like if the main reason to put a child into movies like this is to sympathize with them, right? And it's hard to do that with Daigoro.
It is. It's very hard. And if you're hearing those noises in the background, that's my own little cub coming into my office area. But I mean, that's a perfect illustration of what happens, right? He sees something happening and he reacts to it. He doesn't just stand there and stare blankly. And I think a big part of it too is just, tastes have changed, right? I mean, I think the audiences now are a bit more critical and a bit more discerning than they were back then. And, also the type of, we also can't discount the type of environment that Daigoro was raised in. I mean, I can't really say that Ogami is a good father here. Like I can say that about The Mandalorian. I can say that about I'm blanking on his name in The Last of Us. I can say that about
Joel.
Batman or Indiana Jones. Joel, yeah, thank you. But I can say that about them, right? They've got their flaws, obviously they've got their rough edges, but you really believe that there's an effort to care for this child. And in these movies, it does feel like it's there, but it doesn't feel as earnest as it does in later versions of this story.
Yeah, like I certainly wouldn't be giving Ito like any Father of the Year awards or anything. Like and you talk about this in your episode in the of the first movie, and it's a key scene in the manga as well, where after Daigoro's mother is killed, Ito offers him a choice between a sword and a ball. And if he picks the ball, then he would have just killed his son right there. So then he could remain a child forever. And then if he picks the sword, he's gonna walk the demon path to hell with him, and they're gonna be miserable the whole time. And Daigoro picks the sword, and he's like, "Oh, I feel sorry for you that you've chosen this terrible life for yourself." But yeah, so that's the life that he's kind of allowing his son to live. Like any good father wouldn't go out on this like very convoluted story of revenge via assassinations. Like they would probably just say like drop him off at an orphanage or an inn or something. Anywhere would be better than going along with him.
Yeah, I mean, just that scene stands out to me even more because I don't think my daughter had been born by the time I'd recorded that episode yet. So
oh yes,
I don't even think my wife was pregnant at that point. So yeah, it hits a lot differently now that I recall it, because I'm like, I look at my kids now, and my son, he's about a year and a half, and I'm not sure. Daigoro is probably about
it's a 3, I think, is
3. Yeah, and my daughter is 3 years old. I mean, if I had like a plain colored ball and a shiny sword, my kid would go right for the shiny thing. I mean, I think also, you have to take into account this time period too, because we didn't know about children what we do now too, right? There's this whole idea that like children were basically tiny adults, was kind of like the thinking that a lot of people had back then.
Yeah, well, yeah, the concept of a childhood is really like a 20th century invention, right?
Oh yeah,
like,
absolutely, right.
Like it's this is very true in like Western history, like I assume also for Japan, just from the small amount of history I know about it, is like children there are tiny adults. They're expected to kind of behave and show respect and deference, right? So like it's not so crazy that Daigoro would see his father with his sword and then want to pick that instead of a ball, right? Like would he even have a ball that he was playing with? Like is that actually accurate?
No, that's also a good point too. And even up until fairly recently, because you look at photos from World War II, they had kids working in those factories back then as well. So it's not like it's not like child labor is something in the far distant past. It's still within living memory for some people.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But yeah, and we had touched on this before about the kind of like the power structures type thing. And I think this movie does do a pretty good job of criticizing it, aside from, like I mentioned about what I felt was, a bit of gratuitous with the rape scenes. But when it comes to these actual ideas of showing about how corrupt and kind of broken this society is, I mean, I think that scene at the brothel and the scene with Kanbei at the beginning, but also the scene at the brothel, both do a very good job of illustrating this idea, because in both these scenes, we see this idea that, the women especially, they don't matter. And even someone like Torizo, who is a woman, but she's in a position of power, even she has bought into that idea. And she tells the girl, you are basically property. You were sold to this brothel.
Yeah. Well, and she herself, like, is kind of displaced from, like, because their family already has lost this significant amount of power that they've had. And so she's kind of has fallen from that, but she still is kind of very much asserting, her place within that structure of power, where she's very solidly in the middle. And then, someone who's a sex worker is at the bottom, and we've paid for you. That's an investment, and that's something you owe us. And so you can't just walk away from that.
Also, what do you think about the whole idea of Ogami letting Kanbei live in the beginning? Because and refusing to duel with him. I mean, I could see this one of two ways, right? One, I could see it as him refusing to duel with Kanbei is kind of like a punishment in and of itself.
Yes.
But at the same time, you're letting this guy who just enabled rape and murdered a bunch of people to walk free.
Yeah. Well, I think your first point is very on point, because he sees in his eyes, like, oh, this is a guy who is looking to, like, it would be a joy for him to die at the hands of someone like me. He's looking for a true samurai's death. And like Kanbei, like, immediately has reservations about what he did. He feels very embarrassed that Ogami has seen, what he's done. And then like, he's very at peace with the idea that, if I lose this duel, then at least I can go out, like, fighting honorably after doing something so dishonorable, even though, like, it was in action to serve my lord, which in itself, any action to serve my lord is honorable, right? So there's a contradiction there.
Yeah, I mean, also too, is it really regret he feels, or is it just like, regret that he got caught? Because that's something that I was kind of thinking to me. And I feel like I think that scene, that theme of, punishing him by not giving him the honorable death he wants, I think that would have played a little bit better if Ogami had at least kicked his ass and humiliated him and then refused to kill him.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess you could see it another way, in that, like, he saw the pain in his eyes, and he wants him to kind of go and discover what it is to be a true warrior on his own, and saw that he had that conflict and wanted him to resolve it. I guess the main answer is, like, they wanted the movie to happen, right? So that's why they did it. They wanted that arc in there. But yeah, like, Ito is a hard character to kind of grasp, right? Because I think just from a quick outsider's perspective, you might think, like, well, this guy stands for truth and justice above all. But that's not always the case, right? Like like when he's in the brothel, he's certainly acts like the most honorable man who's ever existed, right? He's protecting the sex worker against this huge onslaught of forces. What a great guy. But then he also sees these two innocent murdered women on the road, and doesn't really give two thoughts to avenging them, right? So he's a difficult character to decipher.
Yeah. And I think this whole idea of the whole code of Bushido, the way of the warrior thing, I feel like this movie is trying to criticize this, but I don't feel like that criticism is really coming through as clearly as I think it would be better served if it did.
Well, I think the movie's ultimately getting at is, there are these true samurai who actually live by that code, and they are kind of themselves disserviced by the people above them, who are the lords who benefit from having people like that in their employ, but who don't have to live honorably as they would do. So I think that's where I think the movie is kind of bought into the samurai code in that way, but I think it's not where it's criticizing is it's a class criticism, right? Whereas the samurai are very honorable, upper class people, right? And upper middle class people, right? Whereas the lords who kind of use them as pawns are the villains.
Yeah. And also it does seem like they I don't really, I think you're right. I think the movie does kind of buy into that, because in the end he does give Kanbei what he wants. And he has this whole idea of it's, Bushido, it's not simply to live or die, but to live through death.
Yeah.
And he also says that he would have done the same thing that Kanbei did, which I think that's also another knock against him in the hero column there.
Yeah. So maybe we should explain to exactly what the dilemma that kind of Kanbei's been dealing with. So this was years before, when he was a guard for a lord, and they were attacked on the road, as is usual in the Lone Wolf and Cub universe, and probably very accurate for Edo period Japan.
Right.
They were attacked by overwhelming number of Ronin, and Kanbei left his post next to his lord to go on offense, and by doing that, he surprised the Ronins and he was able to defeat them. But by leaving his post and leaving his lord, unguarded, then that's what kind of brought shame on him, because he, even though his actions probably saved the lord's life, he technically didn't do what he was supposed to do, and that's kind of what the conflict is. And
oh, I see. Yeah, I was misremembering. I was thinking he was saying that in reference to the first scene. So that's obviously a different situation then.
No, yeah, I think that one he's just definitely in the wrong for sure.
Yeah.
No, yeah. So when they do duel at the end, and it proves that Kanbei is close to Ito's equal, but not quite, because he gets a good slash in at Ito, but is mortally wounded. He says his story and then says what would you do? What is a true samurai's thing to do? And that's kind of the main theme at the movie, right? What is the honorable action? What does honor even mean in these systems? And I do think Ito's answer is interesting here, in that he says and you said the line yourself. What is it exactly? A true warrior walks towards death or chases death. And so for me, that encapsulates all of Lone Wolf and Cub, is that he reached a point where he was the shogun's executioner. He followed the rules every way he could, and then everything was taken away from him. And so he's found his own path within this, which is marching towards death. And so he says he would have done the exact same thing. And to me, that's him kind of acknowledging that the system is broken. He's found his own way to be an honorable warrior, but it's not serving those people at the top.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably that is a problem with this whole idea of Bushido too, right? It's all about the whole idea of striving towards death, is kind of that issue. It
Yeah.
really, it does kind of take some of that heroism out of the samurai thing, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think that it is better to kind of expose this system for what it actually was, as opposed to the more because that always annoyed, again, going back to Last Samurai, when they're like, oh, we defend the people, we are the honorable defenders of the people, and if we wrong the people, I'm like, bitch, please. Well, they fucking didn't.
Well, it's that like classic Orientalism, right? Like it's the West like fetishizing the East as like, very honorable people, and like, there's some truth to like there is honor in Japanese culture, right? But like it's not like something you should put on a pedestal. Like the samurai
Right.
we're not these like selfless warriors, always doing the right thing. That's never
Yeah,
existed anywhere in history.
and I'd argue it's not as much honor as it is obligation too. Is really probably a better way to define it.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But yeah, but some of the other things too. I mean, like we said, the movie looks great. The action scenes are really well done in this. As we had said before, it feels much more dynamic. It feels like it moves at a much faster pace than some of the earlier ones.
Yeah, and we've kind of just been skipping over the plot a bit, but kind of just getting towards the end where he was at the brothel, then he agrees to be tortured by that the Yakuza clan, and it turns out that they're actually part of a former displaced family of like high-ranking civil servants who were betrayed by someone who like sold out their lord to become a protectorate of the shogun, and just to assume a position of power. So it's the most convoluted way he's ever taken an assassination assignment, basically. And so then his assassination target is this governor, and it all kind of comes to head at that final scene where he's pushing the cart around, and then all of a sudden he turns around and there's 200 plus men on the mountainside. Like, just an incredible shot heading into probably the best sequence in all of the Lone Wolf and Cub movies, which is like him against that entire army.
Yeah, and this it looks like the baby cart's gotten an upgrade from the first movie as well, because now it's not just like it's got like a bulletproof shield in it. It's got a bunch of guns in there too.
Yeah, and that wasn't explained in the second movie. Like, this is just the first glance we get at those miniguns, and that was a whole plot in the manga, because they go and see like the head gunsmith of Japan at the time, and he installs that minigun system in his cart as a favor to Ito. And yeah, that was another thing I was gonna bring up, is like, when we're talking about
I wonder if they at some point someone watched the first Django movie and it's like, we need to have something like that.
well, it is used in the manga. So it's always kind of, when Ito is in a place of like great disadvantage, he will employ that as sort of an equalizer. And so that I thought that was kind of interesting, and like it pairs well with a movie like Yojimbo, where there's the one character with a gun, and the gun is seen as such like a foreign element that doesn't belong in Japan and doesn't belong within this like system of honor. And like it's sort of played like that in this movie as well, right? Where the gun kind of represents this like encroaching Western influence, though like Westerners still weren't allowed in Japan at that time, but they're certainly doing some more trade with the Portuguese, and guns are kind of flowing through. And then this movie, it goes back to what I was saying with Ito's kind of new philosophy, where he's not going to be bound completely by the old ways. Like, he will use a gun, but only when he's basically forced to. Like, at the end, when the governor is just like shooting at him, he pulls out a gun and shoots him back. When like he was taking on an army of 200 people, like he could have pulled out a handgun at any point during that, right? But he only did it. He only did it when he felt he had to survive.
Right. I mean, I wonder if, because the manga started coming out in 1970, so I do wonder if Koike was influenced by Django then.
Oh, maybe, yeah. Well,
Um,
it certainly is a great visual. Like it just
mm,
the card is such a fascinating object in this series. Like, because it's basically like just tricked out beyond belief. Like every element of it is a hidden weapon, basically.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely I mean, it would not be my favorite of samurai movie, but if I'm going to compare this to Sword of Vengeance, I definitely think I prefer this one to Sword of Vengeance. Um, what are some final thoughts you have about the film?
Well, for me, like uh the action sequence sort of towards the end is just exhilarating to watch. Like I've
Hmm.
that's probably why I picked this one as the high point of the series. And um you mentioned like and I always forget the actor's name, but you can really tell he's very skilled with a katana here. Like it's how they film the action too. Like it's just like these quick swipes and then on to the next enemy. Like it's 50 like little mini fights. It's very exhilarating to watch.
Hmm.
um and the plot is basically unimportant. But I think it does a good job of kind of um poking at that mythology of the samurai, as we were talking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So was this? And I'm always curious about this because I know with a lot of Japanese adaptations of manga, they tend to, at least in the older ones, I'm not so sure about some of the more recent ones, but they tend to stick pretty closely to the source material, at least in comparison to Western adaptations of comics and manga. Now, you having read the manga, is this story taken from the manga? Is it a pretty close adaptation, do you feel?
Well, and so the the problem with the manga is like there's so many different stories in there.
Hmm.
And I've watched this one a few times now, so I can't definitively say that one way or the other. I think the two core stories, like the one with Kanbei and the one with like him going after a governor because the governor exposed um that a lord had like lost his mind, so that
Hmm.
that territory would become part of the shogunate. And then him suffering a torture for a sex worker. I know all of that happened. I don't know if it happened in the same story. Like
Hmm.
I feel like this might be combining a few of them together, though I can't say for sure. And the fact that you have the author as the screenwriter makes me think like
Hmm.
it is pretty true. But um, no, I can't remember like one for one how close it is, but all the elements were in the manga for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I was just curious about that. Yeah. And also because, like you said, Koike also wrote the screenplay for this. I imagine too, he probably, if he was anything like me, if I was given the chance to adapt my work, I would probably see like, well, this is a chance where I can, kind of fix mistakes I made the first time around.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, and like because each movie might be the last one, so
Hmm.
why not just put the best bits in there? Like you might not have the luxury of waiting to the next issue. Like let's just cram as many ideas into these movies as you can.
Absolutely. Yeah. And obviously, I mean, I think that kind of shows since there are only six movies and there was like, 20 some volumes of the manga. So obviously they couldn't
Yeah,
get through the whole thing.
yeah, no, and like the movie series doesn't even come close to resolving the story either. It sort of just ends.
Oh, okay.
Um, well, and then like they have a bit of the Yagyu clan in this one, where like that's the big rival clan that's been
Hmm.
plotting Ogami's death since the first chapter.
Right.
And they kind of just show up at the end saying, "Oh, we'll get you next time," but they didn't really have
Hmm.
anything to do with the plot or anything. But I always kind of preferred those issues of the manga, anyways, the ones where it's just kind of them off on a side assassination mission rather than kind
Hmm.
of working towards like the whole revenge story. It's kind of like the X Files, like it's a Monster of the Week episode as
Right. Yeah.
opposed to like
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
anthology episode.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially, a lot of people now is a lot of people are saying now that, going back and reflecting on the X Files, they prefer those kind of like Monster of the Week episodes a lot
Yeah,
of times to the mythology ones.
well, because then like you can really just make that episode a complete story, right? And that's what I liked
Right.
about the mangas too, right? As you know he was highly touted as like doing very good research and into Edo era Japan. And so, each issue they would be traveling to this new place, meeting like a new occupation in Japan at that time, and like really kind of just shows a very lived in world. Whereas like when like in the end the ones where like he's battling the Yagu are good as well, but I always just kind of preferred those ones that can be its own complete story.
Well, I think too, like it shows you something that maybe a lot of these other types of stories, because the whole, Ronin samurai gets disgraced and goes out on a quest for vengeance. It's not an original story, right? I mean, let's be real. But focusing on some of these other types of aspects of Edo society and using the samurai character as a vehicle into them is probably what makes this manga stand out a little bit more from a lot of others at that time.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like if his plan was to avenge his family, and he's going to do that by like slowly amassing money through like 50 assassinations, like that's a really terrible plan. Like,
yeah
like there's much more direct ways you can go about that, but you're right, like it just basically allows them, we'll use these as a vehicle, we'll examine this part, and we can put a lot of interesting stories in there and then have that as a backdrop, right? And have them be the characters, the audience surrogate that can walk through Edo Japan.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's a good note to end on. Trevor, thanks so much for coming on. And why don't you tell people where they can find your podcast?
Yeah, so it's First Look Final Word. We're on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're on all the social media, so look us up. And we're trying to figure out how to have guests on the podcast, Perry. If you're ever interested, if we are able to figure that out, how to do that while we're in a car,
especially with movie release dates being kind of weird here in Japan as well. And again, as mentioned before, me having 2 kids and not always able to get out to the theater.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, we're still trying to figure out how to do it where people aren't in the actual physical location that we are. But yeah, we're trying to figure it out. But yeah, there've been some great Japanese releases this past year, like Godzilla -1,
which I still have not been able to see yet.
And then early this week, I just saw Monster. I don't know if you've seen that one yet.
I really want to see that. Again, I'm waiting for, because when they come out here in theaters, that they don't have any English subtitles, and I can
really? Oh, okay,
yeah, and I can understand Japanese most of what I hear, but especially if I'm going to be sitting down and talking about it for this, I want to make sure I fully understand it. So I definitely want English subtitles for that. And Monster, I think, is due out on DVD next month here, so I'm going to be picking that up when it comes out, because I really want to see it. My wife and I both love Koreeda.
And I think it might be his best. I don't know. Like,
oh really? Okay.
Shoplifters is really great. Afterlife is great. But yeah, this one was really, really good. There were some parts of the story that I felt like are very like culturally specific that, while I'm understanding what they're saying, like I might not be able to like, fully feel it on the emotional level. So be interested when you do see it. Let me know how true it rings.
Yeah, I'm really, because Koreeda and also, you mentioned Kiyoshi Kurosawa, when you mentioned Cure. Like, he's also one of those directors who, both of them are probably, I'd argue, might be the best currently working directors who are able to really kind of capture those aspects of Japanese society. Right.
Well, and so what do you think of Hamaguchi? Like, have you seen Drive My Car?
No, I have not seen that yet. It's the long runtime has kind of put me off on seeing it right away.
No, it's definitely worth it. Like it's out on Criterion Collection right now.
Yeah.
So I would say, like, better than any director in the world, he's good at just filming people having quiet conversations and making those quiet conversations absolutely fascinating. And this is from me, who's a non-Japanese speaker, like just being absolutely enthralled by 2 people talking in the backseat of a car for 20 minutes and it being the most gripping thing I've ever seen. So definitely see Drive My Car. Don't be scared of the runtime. It's really worth it. And then he has a new movie coming out this year. Well, I think think it technically already premiered at some festivals, but it's called Evil Does Not Exist, I think.
Oh, okay. I haven't even heard of that one.
I think it hasn't even technically premiered in Japan yet. Like it's just played the festival circuit this last cycle.
Okay, we'll have to check those out then. So again, thank you so much for coming on. As for us, we are japanonfilm.com is the website, Japan on Film on the socials, which these days pretty much is Blue Sky, Threads, and we post stuff on Instagram from time to time, but mostly Blue Sky and Threads are where we're most active. We are also part of the Film Stories podcast network, so please check them out at filmstories.co.uk and listen up after the credits to hear what is coming up next on the network. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.